right, so this week we're returning to Revelation chapter 12, and we're going to finish the 12th chapter, and next week we'll pick up chapter 13. But just the reason we're having to spend a little more time on this versus some of the others, like when we did chapter 10, we actually went pretty quick, simply because it was like trumpet, judgment, next trumpet, judgment. Yet here in chapter 12, the reason we're having to take our time a little bit is because of the imagery that is used. And that's kind of slowed us down a little bit, which isn't a problem. Sometimes it's good to go slow. Because we're going to be revisiting it again, the imagery, because there's still the question of who is the woman. Because up until now, we dealt with the child, which was nobody disagrees, the child represents Christ. Why? Because it says he will rule all nations with an iron scepter. Direct reference to Psalm 2, and nobody disagrees. Then you got the dragon. Nobody disagrees because it flat out tells you who it is. It flat out says, so the great dragon was cast out, the serpent of old, called the devil and Satan. So it's like, there you go. We don't have to remember that. But then there's the woman. Like, who is the woman? And even as I was continuing to prepare for the rest of chapter 12, it continued to come up of who the woman is. And the reason it becomes a little strained is because we deal with things. So first, the woman gives birth to the child. And we're like, okay, that would be Mary. Mary's the one who gave birth to Jesus. And that partly works, except there's another problem. It talks about her existing much later. And what I mean by that, I don't just mean that Mary was alive after the ascension, because that seems to be a historical fact. We're talking much, much, much later, as in today. So you run into an issue there. So although Mary fits partly, she doesn't fit the whole. Then the other one is like, oh, it represents all the people of God for all time. Yet, we're going to run into a problem with that too. Because if that's the case, the people of God for all time, we typically call that the church. The church doesn't give birth to Jesus. Jesus gives birth to the church, if you want to use that imagery. So that one doesn't really work. Now, even if that's going to throw everything in, the section we're going to get into now is there's another imagery thrown in, another party thrown in here. And that is more offspring of the woman. And so we've got a woman who's there. She gives birth to Christ. She's there. She's persecuted. She flees. And she has other children. Yet, the question is, when did this all take place? That was one of the big questions of last week. If you remember, we were dealing with the fact that it talks about that Satan was cast out of heaven. There was a war between Michael and his angels and the devil and his angels, and the devil and his angels lost, and they were cast down to the earth. And the question that we had to wrestle with last week is, when did that happen? Or has it happened yet? When does it take place? Because unfortunately, chapter 12 doesn't actually give us a time frame of this. Now, we can assume certain time frames. For example, as I said, the woman gives birth to the child. As soon as she bore the male child, it says the dragon tried to consume, to devour the child. And we understand that took place. The scriptures give us a perfect rendition of this, just not with this imagery, but when Christ was born, the Magi showed up at King Herod, said, where is he born, King of the Jews? Herod asked his advisors. They did their studies, say, oh, it'll be in Bethlehem of Judea. And then what did Herod do? Order the death of all male children 2 years and under, trying to devour the child. So that gives us a time frame here. Then it says that the child was caught up to God and his throne. That's the ascension. So we've got a time frame there. Then it just says, and war broke out in heaven. But when was that? Because it seems up to this point that Satan had access to heaven. Now here I'm defining heaven as the place of God's dwelling. I think it's the best definition of heaven that we have. That's where God dwells. And so Satan had access to him. Now, we know in the past that Satan seemed to have had access to the throne room of God. Why? And I point this out because in Job, what does it say? It says the angels came to present themselves and Satan came too. So then it's got to be after that. And then the question comes, the fact that did it happen during the ministry of Jesus or is it something later? And as I said, the text doesn't kind of answer either way. You kind of got to weigh it. Now, I hold from the study that I think it's more of a future event, something that is still yet to come. And the reason I hold this is because it says that the devil has been cast down, and woe to the inhabitants of the earth. The devil has come down with a great wrath because he knows he has a short time. That was verse 12. That's where we left off last week. And so it seems to indicate that during that time frame, that Satan's persecution is going to be exceedingly high, and he's going to be doing whatever he can. And I'd almost argue that, yes, we're in the end times since the death, resurrection, ascension of Christ. And by end times there, I'm referring to the last phase of history. Peter actually says this. He makes mention of it in Acts chapter 2 when the people are saying, hey, everybody's kind of drunk. And Peter's argument, no, they're not drunk. It's only 9 in the morning. Who gets drunk at 9 in the morning? Come on, use your head. That's kind of his logic there. Remember, he's not in a culture where everyone's getting drunk all the time. He says, this is what the prophet Joel said. In the last days, I will pour out my spirit. So in other words, in the last phase. What we're looking at is the last of the last days. And so I think you can't separate this event from that there's going to come a time where Satan's going to lose his access to the throne room, where he can no longer stand there and accuse the brethren day and night. And that, so what does he now do? He wants to go after the believers. Now, why? Well, once you understand, you get a bit of understanding of Satan's motivation here. And I admit, I'm speculating a little bit here. Satan's motivation is to do nothing except hurt God. That's what he wants. And so what's the best way to hurt God? Go after the one thing that God truly loves. That's humanity. From the very beginning, that's what God set out to make, was humans. Everything up to that point, if you read the Genesis account, was for humans. And that's why, if you actually pay attention, we say in Genesis 1, there's a pattern. God said, then there was, and it was good. And God saw that it was good. Except that doesn't happen on day 2. Skips it. There's no saying, and God saw that it was good. It just goes, and there was evening and morning. Why? Because on day 2, it was just the separation of the firmaments, which is a necessary step, but yeah, it's not creation, and it doesn't do anything for us. So what's he do on the next day? Dry land, and it was good. Plants, and it was good. Just so you know, there actually is kind of a funny thing in Jewish culture. That's why they get married on that day, because it's considered a doubly blessed day, because it was good twice. But that was all for humanity. And then once humanity was made in God's image, they became a living being. Then God looked and said, now it is very good. And so when Satan lost his place, what did he go after immediately? He didn't go after the animals. He didn't go after the trees. He went after humanity. And that's who he wants. That's who he targets, because that is, well, like it, God's beloved. That's what he wanted. So when Satan is doing in God's throne room, what is he doing? He's constantly accusing us, reminding God of how much we have failed, reminding of how sinful we are, reminding him of how we rebelled against him, how we've broken his law, making all these accusations, and eventually the time's going to come when God says, that's enough. And he is cast out, and he loses the ability to do that. And what's that going to do? Make him even madder. And why is this so important? Because notice, now that sounds horrible, because if we sat there, and we haven't quite got to where we're going to go today, but it's important here. If we just got a kind of a twinge there, where we like that Satan is sitting there just accusing us, before God of every bad thing we've done, every thought we've done, every rebellion we've done. Don't miss what's in the middle of this. Verse 10 here, just a reminder to us. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ has come. For the accuser of the brethren who has accused them before our God day and night has been cast down. And verse 11, and they overcame him. Who's they? The ones the enemy's been accusing day and night. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. In other words, if we're going and we're being reminded of our past, reminded of our failures, we don't try to argue, yes, but I did this good, this good, this good. How do we argue? The blood of the Lamb. So that's my victory. It's like, yes, I did all this, but Jesus paid the price for me. That's the beauty of it. And so when he's cast down, his wrath's going to be kindled and he's going to unleash it on humanity. Not just all of humanity, but a very specific group. That's what we're going to look at. Let's look at verse 13. We're going to read from 13 to 17, the end of the chapter. It says, now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who had gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time, from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keeps the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now, don't separate this back from verse 6. Now, notice it says that the woman was looked after for the time period, right? Verse 14, time, times, and half a time. That should draw you back to verse 6. The woman fled to the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Now, the reason I say that's important, that what is happening is it's saying the woman flees into the wilderness. The question that we're running into now is, why did she flee? And how do we know? Why? Because the dragon has been cast out. He's down on earth, and he couldn't devour her child. He couldn't accuse before the throne of God anymore. So what is he going after? The woman. And she flees to the wilderness. Now, this is where verse 16 is picked up. Now, again, who is the woman? Because as I said, now we've got three more characters in play. The woman, the dragon, her offspring. Now, the offspring are basically identified in a way. As I said, he makes war against the rest of her offspring. Who are they? Who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. There's no denying what that is then. They're believers. They're what we'd classify as Christians. The dragon, well, he hasn't changed. The dragon's the dragon. Satan, the enemy. So the woman, who is it? So now if you put this all together about who the woman is, this is why it was important. She was there at the beginning. She gives birth to the child. She's there at the end. She has offspring that come from her, and she's taken into the wilderness. The best answer for this, which also answers where Mary fits in, is these are not just Israel, the nation. This is the remnant believing Israel. The chosen people that God has chosen as the first fruits for himself of all creation, of mankind. They're, if you want, I've been studying the laws again, they're the Levites of humanity, if you want. If you ever wonder why God chose the Levites, he says they're my first fruit to serve before me. That's the ones that I've taken for myself. And so that's what it is. These are his remnant believing, and whom Mary is a part of. Make no mistake, the angel Gabriel shows up, and what does Mary say? let it be to the Lord, as you said, to your Lord's servant. I am the Lord's servant. And we've seen that God has always kept his remnant. Not everybody who is Israel is of the true Israel. Jesus even says this. They think they're of the synagogue of God, but they're the synagogue of Satan. Even in his ministry, he says, no, you are of your father, the devil. But they're like, no, we're not. We're Abraham's children. And Jesus is like, no, you're not. But there is still a remnant of the believers. And this also makes sense if you go back to Revelation chapter 7. Remember, the day of the wrath of the Lamb has come. Who can stand? And it answers the question first. Who does it start with? Believing Israel. And then it mentions the Gentiles. And what happened from the believing Jews, the remnant Jews, came the Messiah, the ministry of the Messiah. When Jesus ascended, who was the first to come to faith? Jews. Peter on the day of Pentecost. Peter preaches to the Jews. There's a day of Pentecost. The people come to faith. Then, what's the big turning point, in essence, of the gospel? It's actually Peter preaching again at Cornelius, the Gentile. And it's sometimes called the Gentile Pentecost, where they're included in. Peter preached, and what did he see happen? The Holy Spirit came down and they experienced the exact same thing. And Peter even uses that later when there's a discussion about what do we do about the Gentiles. And Peter's like, well, they're part of us. So how do I know? Because when I preached, it came down. So who's the rest of the offspring of the woman? The believing Gentiles. And so these are our three kind of players now. But let's unpack the imagery here, because this imagery is going to be a little bit different. Remember, if we saw before that it says the dragon wanted to devour the male child, and we know that, oh wait, that was Herod at Bethlehem, can we then use that to unpack what's going to take place? This is the trick with imagery. It has a very specific meaning. So, when the dragon saw that he'd been cast down to earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the child. Since we've already laid out who this is, it means when he first comes down, who's his target? The believing remnant Israel. He's going to go after them first. And yet, what happens? It says the woman was given two wings of a great eagle and made to fly to the wilderness to her place. Now, this is where you cannot borrow from modern imagery to put it into the text. Because if there's a nation on earth who has a symbol of an eagle, who is it? US. It's like, oh, see, the U.S. is going to come to Israel's aid during that time. No, that's reading modern definitions into it. We got to stick with what the scripture says here. So if we're going to talk about that kind of thing, we're going to go all the way back to Exodus chapter 19. Exodus chapter 19. Now, what happened in the Exodus? The Israelites from Egypt, where did they go? Into the wilderness, where they were looked after for 40 years. Exodus 19. Don't know if I told you that. I didn't. Verse 4. Yep, Exodus 19:4. And he says this, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. So the imagery there is swiftly. I am going to swiftly rescue you by my power. So when it talks about that they were saved and given two wings of a great eagle, it's talking about God providing for them swiftly so that they will be moved quickly. And you got to remember how fast the Israelites left Egypt. It was actually a very short period of time. I'm not talking about the plagues themselves. I'm talking about once the final plague hit, the Egyptians got up in the morning and said, get out. And they were told to ask them for whatever you want. Ask them for silver, ask them for gold. And they plundered them, and the Egyptians wanted rid of them so quick, they're just like, take what you want and get out. I'll pay the price, get out of here. this is what the reference is. It's not America coming to the rescue. It's the divine power of God who's saying, I am going to move you myself. I'm going to give you the power. We're going to move quickly in that aspect. And she went into the wilderness to her place. Now, again, compare that to verse 6, where she had a place prepared by God. So it's some place that God has already selected, that God has already put there ahead of time. Now, I will tell you that there are many who believe that this place is, you can still look it up, is Petra. And they've already stored some supplies there, gospel tracts, that kind of thing. Now, typically, why would they put gospel tracts there? Because what are they thinking? That all of Israel is going to flee there. So you're going to have non-believers there. I tend to lean more towards this is remnant Israel. They're already of the believing type. But that's the thing. It's already been prepared, that kind of thing. That's what they're going with. And so she's going there where she will be nourished for a time, and half a time. That's the exact same as 1,260 days. Now, I think this does kind of give us a time frame when this will happen. Because if, by studying the definition, that the time period of the final phase is the final week of Daniel, 1 week equals 7 years. And if 1,260 days, or times and half a time, is 3.5 years, this tells us that this would happen right around the midway point, which would be somewhere around the 6th trumpet, around the proclamation of the witnesses. All of this is happening at once. It would also explain why the dragon continues to get more and more furious. And so it kind of gives us a time frame that the remnant of Israel will be protected, provided for, looked after for the times and half a time. Now, as they are fleeing from the serpent, the dragon, it says the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman. Now there's an imagery for you. So do we really think that a dragon is going to show up on the scene and breathe water to try to wipe out a woman? Well, no, obviously there's imagery here. So what are we looking at? Well, let's unpack this a little bit. Let's go. We're going to do a bit of hopping here. Isaiah first. We're going to go to Isaiah chapter 8. And then we're just going to go forward. Isaiah, then Daniel, Isaiah, then Jeremiah, then Daniel. Isaiah chapter 8. Now this is talking about Assyria invading the land, okay? So chapter 8, starting, I'm going to look at verse 7 and 8. It says, now, therefore, behold, the Lord brings up over them the waters of the river, a strong and mighty. The king of Assyria and all his glory will go up over all his channels and go over all his banks. So what's the river represent in this case? The armies of Assyria. The king of Assyria and his armies. Let's go over to Jeremiah 46. Jeremiah 46. And again, we want 7 and 8. Jeremiah 46, verse 7 and 8 says this. Who is this coming up like a flood, whose waters move like the rivers? Egypt rises up like a flood, and its waters move like the rivers. And he says, I will go up and cover the earth. I will destroy the city and its inhabitants. If you want verse 8, O come, O horses, and rage, O chariots, and let the mighty men come forth. So you start to get the picture. Again, a mighty river is being used as a definition for a vast army. Got to sweep across the land. Let's jump to Daniel. Threefold witness. Daniel chapter 9. and it's verse 26. Now this is during the 62 weeks have already taken place. So it says, and after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end of it shall be with a flood. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined. So again, it's talking about an army coming like a flood. So here in Revelation, when it says the dragon is spewing out water, more than likely, you can say with a high degree of confidence, he's talking about a people fleeing and an army coming after them. Again, you want the Exodus? Israel fled out of Egypt, and what came right behind them? An army of the Egyptians came behind them to consume them. Kind of thing. So the imagery there is the people, the remnants, fleeing, and the dragon using an army to come after them. This shouldn't be a surprise. If we think about what's taking place at this point, we haven't hit the other player here. We haven't hit all the major players yet in the tribulation. Remember, up to this point, it's only been really looking at the judgments, and then we reached kind of like the seventh trumpet. And what's happened now is it's, okay, we're at the end, but we're going to back up to tell you what's going on here, what's taking place during this time frame. And it's really focusing on that last 3 years, what we call the Great Tribulation. And it's being kicked off with the dragon, whose power it is, has got people to come after it. And the other players that we haven't pulled in yet, but we will look at next week, are the beast from the sea and the beast from the land. We haven't met these two yet. So you got the true Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit. Then you're going to end up with the false Trinity, the dragon, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the land. Or Satan, the Antichrist, and his false prophet. Those are coming. And so you got to think, that's obviously it's a leader who's got power over a vast dominion, and he will have power over an army to consume. And so this army's coming after them as they're fleeing into the wilderness, and it says what happens? It says, so the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. That's kind of an interesting imagery. So the question is, what does it mean? So if we understand that the woman is remnant Israel fleeing, the dragon is Satan using his influence, his power to cause an army to go after them, what about the earth opening up? Is this just a matter of saying, hey, it's divine protection? Or maybe it's something a little more? Well, perhaps it's a little more. Let's go to... Yeah, that happens too. I was actually thinking the book of Numbers and Korah's rebellion kind of thing. As much as I like Lord of the Rings, I don't think it quite lines up here, the Black Gate. Numbers 16, there we go. That's what I was trying to think of. Numbers 16. I gotta go one more page. So, this is a case that Korah thought that they should be just as high up, that they should have as much authority and power, and he had a great group of people with him, and the Lord's going to make a distinction between Moses and Korah. And so, we're picking up, verse 32 is where you'll actually get to, but I'm going to start at verse 28, just to get the context. And Moses said, "By this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own will. If these men die naturally like all men, or if they are visited by the common fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the pit, then you will understand that these men have rejected the Lord. Now it came to pass, as he finished speaking all these words, that the ground split apart under them, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households, and all the men with Korah, with all their goods. So they and all those with them went down alive into the pit. The earth closed up over them, and they perished from among the assembly. Then all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, lest the earth swallow us up also. What happened to Korah? Literally, the earth opened and swallowed it. So this is a case that this may not be just a picture thing. This may actually be legitimately what happens. And that shouldn't be a surprise. Think about it. If I'm using the Exodus, it's a little bit different, but it's very similar. The Israelites are fleeing. The Egyptians are chasing after them. The Israelites go past the point. They go into the waters through the Red Sea. The Egyptian army is chasing them, and what happens? Yeah. The earth, or not the earth, the sea swallows them up. So this is not outside the realm of possibility. We've got grounds for it before. That what ends up happening is they're chasing after them, and the earth literally opens up. And it's not that big of a surprise. Oftentimes, the way things are described in Scripture uses poetic language to describe what actually took place. A great example of this, if you read the Judges, the battle of Barak and Sisera, or you may not know it as that, but you think of Deborah as the judge. Sisera was the commander, and his greatest asset, his greatest military weapon was chariots. And they could just crush anything. Why did they lose the battle? Without saying God did it. What happened was, well, as the chariots went to go, God caused it to rain really hard in the valley. And what happens when it rains really, really hard? Yeah, mud and soft ground. Guess what happened to all those chariots? They got stuck. So God intervened in a very military way. And when Deborah describes it in their song, Deborah and Barak's song, talks about the skies opening up and this happening. So this very well, the army is charging after them, and an earthquake happens. And the earth opens up and crushes them. You got to remember, this time period is going to be one of tremendous supernatural activity. Because we've got judgments happening all the time. We've got demon locusts that have come out. We've got the demon horsemen, however they're going to look and do their thing. And you've got God's judgments moving. So this isn't outside the realm of possibility in any way, shape, or form. This is God intervening to protect. And what message does this show? Well, it shows Satan that he can't touch them. This is a beautiful thing for us to understand too. Because this means, as powerful this dragon seems and everything that he does, he is still limited by the true sovereign God over all things. The dragon can pour out his anger, pour out his wrath, but he will never have the real victory at all. Because it's still under God's sovereign will. And so the dragon, he says he gets so mad at this. And the dragon was so enraged that he cannot touch the woman, that he cannot get them anymore. It seems like he only tries once and then he realizes, well, there's no point. If the very earth is going to open up and swallow, I'm not going to touch this. So what does he do? He goes after her children. Again, this isn't outside his tactics. Think about Job. When he played against Job, he says, hey, is Job praising you for nothing? You put a hedge around him. I can't touch him. So remove your hedge and let me touch him. I tell you, he'll curse you. Now he can't. He said, fine, you can do whatever you want, but you can't touch Job. So who does he touch? And in particular, his children. Takes out his children. Why? Because a guy losing his possessions, losing his sheep, losing his camels, losing all that hurts. But you can justify that and go, unfortunate, happens, but I can rebuild. But all of a sudden getting news that all your kids are taken out, that's going to hurt. This is the same tactic. He can't get the woman because she's now protected. So where does he go? After her children. And it doesn't hide who her children are. It clearly says, her offspring, who are they? Who keep the commandments of God. Now, how do we know this isn't just like Old Testament commandments? Because look at the rest of the statement. And have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So what's the commandment of God? It's actually not hard. To love the Lord your God, to love your neighbor, and believe in the one whom he has sent. That's 1 John. That's the commandment. So he's going after the Christians. So this time frame is going to be a really, from an earthly perspective, kind of a bad time frame. Persecution is going to be on the rise. And for a while, it's going to look like he's winning. And then, and I don't want to leave you on that, but even in this, into the next chapter, just for a second, because it talks about, if I get the right place, I didn't look this far ahead recently. When they talk about the beast, who can have victory over the beast, that kind of thing. He performs great signs, but it still talks in a bit that although he does this, it doesn't matter. There are those who overcome them. I'm trying to think where it was. And even warns us in the next chapter, like I said, we'll get this next week, that the time's going to come, and it says, just so you understand, that he who's to go into captivity, he will be killed by the sword, will be killed. But this is the patience of the saints. In other words, they need to endure it. And why? Because eventually what is going to come, and we'll talk about this, that the ones who overcome the beast are again by the blood of the Lamb and the word of the testimony. And even when the dragon says, I'm going to kill them, for the believer, that's the worst, that's the best you can do. It's like, really, is that the best you can do, is to take my physical life from me? Do you know what's going to happen when I take the physical life from me? I'm going to be like Obi-Wan Kenobi. You strike me down, I'm going to become more powerful than you ever thought. Not in our own power here, but why? Because I'm from here and I'm suddenly going to be in the presence of Christ. I'm going to be given a white robe. I'm going to sing a new song. And I'm going to have victory because of what Christ has done. That's the beauty of it. So it's just a warning to us. Like, this is what is going to happen. Why does he tell us this ahead of time? The same reason he told his disciples. I told you ahead of time. So when it does happen, your faith will be strengthened. That's the purpose. That you know that no matter what it does, I have overcome the world. And your victory's with me. That's the point. And so we've got the dragon here this week. And as I said, next week, we're going to be introduced to the next two major players. The beast from the sea and the beast from the land. Because they're important figures. And we'll spend some time kind of unpacking those to understand who they are.